A Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, Book 1, written by George R.R. Martin, produced by Tokibook.com, and read by Melissa Storn. Chapter 51. Sansa. They came for Sansa on the third day. She chose a simple dress of dark grey wool, plainly cut but richly embroidered around the collar and sleeves. Her fingers felt thick and clumsy as she struggled with the silver fastenings without the benefit of servants. Janie Poole had been confined with her, but Janie was useless. Her face was puffy from all her crying, and she could not seem to stop sobbing about her father. "I'm certain your father is well," Sansa told her when she had finally gotten the dress buttoned right. "I'll ask the Queen to let you see him." She thought that kindness might lift Janie's spirits, but the other girl just looked at her with red, swollen eyes and began to cry all the harder. She was such a child. Sansa had wept too, the first day. Even within the stout walls of Maggers Holdfast, with her door closed and barred, it was hard not to be terrified when the killing began. She had grown up to the sound of steel in the yard, and scarcely a day of her life had passed without hearing the clash of sword on sword, yet somehow knowing that the fighting was real made all the difference in the world. She heard it as she had never heard it before, and there were other sounds as well, grunts of pain, angry curses, shouts for help, and the moans of wounded and dying men. In the songs, the knights never screamed nor begged for mercy. So she wept, pleading through her door for them to tell her what was happening, calling for her father, for Septim Ordain, for the king, for her gallant prince. If the men guarding her heard her pleas, they gave no answer. The only time the door opened was late that night, when they thrust Janie Poole inside, bruised and shaking. "They're killing everyone," the steward's daughter had shrieked at her. She went on and on. The hound had broken down her door with a warhammer, she said. There were bodies on the stair of the Tower of the Hand, and the steps were slick with blood. Sansa dried her own tears as she struggled to comfort her friend. They went to sleep in the same bed, cradled in each other's arms like sisters. The second day was even worse. The room where Sansa had been confined was at the top of the highest tower of Maggers Holdfast. From its window she could see that the heavy iron portcullis in the gatehouse was down, and the drawbridge drawn up over the deep dry moat that separated the keep within a keep from the larger castle that surrounded it. Lannister guardsmen prowled the walls with spears and crossbows to hand. The fighting was over, and the silence of the grave had settled over the Red Keep. The only sounds were Janie Poole's endless whimpers and sobs. They were fed, hard cheese and fresh baked bread and milk to break their fast, roast chicken and greens at midday, and a late supper of beef and barley stew, but the servants who brought the meals would not answer Sansa's questions. That evening, some woman brought her clothes from the Tower of the Hand, and some of Janie's things as well, but they seemed nearly as frightened as Janie, and when she tried to talk to them, they fled from her as if she had the Grey Plague. The guards outside the door still refused to let them leave the room. "Please, I need to speak to the Queen again," Sansa told them, as she told everyone she saw that day. "She'll want to talk to me, I know she will. Tell her I want to see her, please. If not the Queen, then Prince Joffrey, if you'd be so kind. We're to marry when we're older." At sunset on the second day, a great bell began to ring. Its voice was deep and sonorous, and the long, slow clanging filled Sansa with a sense of dread. The ringing went on, and after a while they heard other bells answering from the great sept of Baelor on Visenia's hill. The sound rumbled across the city like thunder, warning of the storm to come. "What is it?" Janie asked, covering her ears. "Why are they ringing the bells?" "The king is dead." Sansa could not say how she knew it, yet she did. The slow, endless clanging filled the room, as mournful as a dirge. Had some enemy stormed the castle and murdered King Robert? Was that the meaning of the fighting they had heard? She went to sleep wondering, restless and fearful. Was her beautiful Joffrey the king now, or had they killed him too? She was afraid for him and for her father. If only they would tell her what was happening. That night Sansa dreamt of Joffrey on the throne, with herself seated beside him in a gown of woven gold. She had a crown on her head, and everyone she had ever known came before her to bend the knee and say their curtsies. The next morning, the morning of the third day, Sir Boros Blount of the Kingsguard came to escort her to the Queen. Sir Boros was an ugly man with a broad chest and short, bandy legs. His nose was flat, his cheeks baggy with jowls, his hair grey and brittle. Today he wore white velvet, and his snowy cloak was fastened with a lion brooch. The beast had a soft sheen of gold, and his eyes were tiny rubies. "You look very handsome and splendid this morning, Sir Boros," Sansa told him. A lady remembered her courtesies, and she was resolved to be a lady no matter what. "And you, my lady," Sir Boros said in a flat voice. "Her Grace awaits. Come with me." There were guards outside the door, Lannister men-at-arms in crimson cloaks and lion-crested helms. Sansa made herself smile at them pleasantly and bid them a good morning as she passed. It was the first time she'd been allowed outside the chamber since Sir Aerys Oakheart had led her here 2 mornings past. "To keep you safe, my sweet one," Queen Cersei had told her. "Joffrey would never forgive me if anything happened to his precious." Sansa had expected that Sir Boros would escort her to the royal apartments, but instead he led her out of Maegor's Holdfast. The bridge was down again. Some workmen were lowering a man on ropes into the depths of the dry moat. When Sansa peered down, she saw a body impaled on the huge iron spikes below. She averted her eyes quickly, afraid to ask, afraid to look too long, afraid he might be someone she knew. They found Queen Cersei in the council chambers, seated at the head of a long table littered with papers, candles, and blocks of sealing wax. The room was as splendid as any that Sansa had ever seen. She stared in awe at the carved wooden screen and the twin sphinxes that sat beside the door. "Your Grace," Sir Boros said when they were ushered inside by another of the Kingsguard, Sir Mendon of the curiously dead face. "I've brought the girl." Sansa had hoped Joffrey might be with her. Her prince was not there, but 3 of the king's councillors were. Lord Petyr Baelish sat on the queen's left hand, Grandmaster Pycelle at the end of the table, while Lord Varys hovered over them, smelling flowery. All of them were clad in black, she realized with a feeling of dread. Mourning clothes. The queen wore a high-collared black silk gown, with 100 dark red rubies sewn into her bodice, covering her from neck to bosom. They were cut in the shape of teardrops, as if the queen were weeping blood. Cersei smiled to see her, and Sansa thought it was the sweetest and saddest smile she had ever seen. "Sansa, my sweet child," she said, "I know you've been asking for me. I'm sorry that I could not send for you sooner. Matters have been very unsettled, and I have not had a moment. I trust my people have been taking good care of you." "Everyone has been very sweet and pleasant, Your Grace. Thank you ever so much for asking," Sansa said politely. "Only, well, no one will talk to us or tell us what happened." "Us?" Cersei seemed puzzled. "We put the steward's girl in with her," Sir Boros said. "We did not know what else to do with her." The queen frowned. "Next time you will ask," she said, her voice sharp. "The gods only know what sort of tale she's been filling Sansa's head with." "Jainie's scared," Sansa said. "She won't stop crying. I promised her I'd ask if she could see her father." Old Grandmaster Pycelle lowered his eyes. "Her father is well, isn't he?" Sansa said anxiously. She knew there had been fighting, but surely no one would harm a steward. Wayen Poole did not even wear a sword. Queen Cersei looked at each of the councillors in turn. "I won't have Sansa fretting needlessly. What shall we do with this little friend of hers, my lords?" Lord Petyr leaned forward. "I'll find a place for her." "Not in the city," said the queen. "Do you take me for a fool?" The queen ignored that. "Sir Boros, escort this girl to Lord Petyr's apartments and instruct his people to keep her there until he comes for her. Tell her that Littlefinger will be taking her to see her father. That ought to calm her down. I want her gone before Sansa returns to her chamber." "As you command, Your Grace," Sir Boros said. He bowed deeply, spun on his heel, and took his leave, his long white cloak stirring the air behind him. Sansa was confused. "I don't understand," she said. "Where is Jainie's father? Why can't Sir Boros take her to him instead of Lord Petyr having to do it?" She had promised herself she would be a lady, gentle as the queen and as strong as her mother, the Lady Catelyn, but all of a sudden she was scared again. For a second she thought she might cry. "Where are you sending her? She hasn't done anything wrong. She's a good girl." "She's upset you," the Queen said gently. "We can't be having that. Not another word now. Lord Bellish will see that Janie's well taken care of, I promise you." She patted the chair beside her. "Sit down, Sansa. I want to talk to you." Sansa seated herself beside the Queen. Cersei smiled again, but that did not make her feel any less anxious. Varys was wringing his soft hands together. Grandmaster Pycelle kept his sleepy eyes on the papers in front of him, but she could feel Littlefinger staring. Something about the way the small man looked at her made Sansa feel as though she had no clothes on. Goosebumps pimpled her skin. "Sweet Sansa," Queen Cersei said, laying a soft hand on her wrist. "Such a beautiful child. I do hope you know how much Joffrey and I love you." "You do?" Sansa said, breathless. Littlefinger was forgotten. Her prince loved her. Nothing else mattered. The Queen smiled. "I think of you almost as my own daughter, and I know the love you bear for Joffrey." She gave a weary shake of her head. "I'm afraid we have some grave news about your Lord Father. You must be brave, child." Her quiet words gave Sansa a chill. "What is it?" "Your father is a traitor, dear," Lord Varys said. Grandmaster Pycelle lifted his ancient head. "With my own ears I heard Lord Eddard swear to our beloved King Robert that he would protect the young princes as if they were his own sons. And yet the moment the king was dead, he called a small council together to steal Prince Joffrey's rightful throne." "No," Sansa blurted. "He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't." The Queen picked up a letter. The paper was torn and stiff with dried blood, but the broken seal was her father's, the direwolf stamped in pale wax. "We found this on the captain of your household guards, Sansa. It is a letter to my late husband's brother Stannis, inviting him to take the crown." "Please, your grace, there's been a mistake." Sudden panic made her dizzy and faint. "Please, send for my father. He'll tell you. He would never write such a letter. The king was his friend." "Robert thought so," said the Queen. "This betrayal would have broken his heart. The gods are kind that he did not live to see it." She sighed. "Sansa, sweetling, you must see what a dreadful position this has left us in. You are innocent of any wrong, we all know that, and yet you are the daughter of a traitor. How can I allow you to marry my son?" "But I love him," Sansa wailed, confused and frightened. What did they mean to do to her? What had they done to her father? It was not supposed to happen this way. She had to wed Joffrey. They were betrothed. He was promised to her. She had even dreamed about it. It was unfair to take him away from her on account of whatever her father might have done. "How well I know that, child," Cersei said, her voice so kind and sweet. "Why else should you have come to me and told me of your father's plan to send you away from us, if not for love?" "It was for love," Sansa said in a rush. "Father wouldn't even give me leave to say farewell." She was the good girl, the obedient girl, but she had felt as wicked as Arya that morning, sneaking away from Septa Modane, defying her Lord Father. She had never done anything so willful before, and she would never have done it then if she hadn't loved Joffrey as much as she did. "He was going to take me back to Winterfell and marry me to some hedge knight, even though it was Joff I wanted. I told him, but he wouldn't listen." The king had been her last hope. The king could command father to let her stay in King's Landing and marry Prince Joffrey. Sansa knew he could, but the king had always frightened her. He was loud and rough-voiced and drunk as often as not, and he would probably have just sent her back to Lord Eddard if they even let her see him. So she went to the Queen instead, and poured out her heart, and Cersei had listened and thanked her sweetly. Only then Sir Aerys had escorted her to the high room in Magus Holdfast and posted guards, and a few hours later the fighting had begun outside. "Please," she finished, "you have to let me marry Joffrey. I'll be ever so good a wife to him, you'll see. I'll be a queen just like you, I promise." Queen Cersei looked to the others. "My lords of council, what do you say to her plea?" "The poor child," murmured Varys. "A love so true and innocent, your grace, it would be cruel to deny it. And yet, what can we do? Her father stands condemned." His soft hands washed each other in a gesture of helpless distress. "A child born of traitor seed will find that betrayal comes naturally to her," said Grandmaster Picel. "She is a sweet thing now, but in 10 years who can say what treasons she may hatch?" "No!" Sansa said, horrified. I'd never. I wouldn't betray Joffrey. I love him. I swear it, I do." "Oh, so poignant," said Varys. "And yet it is truly said that blood runs truer than oaths." "She reminds me of the mother, not the father," Lord Petyr Baelish said quietly. "Look at her. The hair, the eyes. She's the very image of Cat at the same age." The Queen looked at her, troubled, and yet Sansa could see kindness in her clear green eyes. "Child," she said, "if I could truly believe that you were not like your father, why nothing should please me more than to see you wed to my Joffrey. I know he loves you with all his heart." She sighed. "And yet, I fear that Lord Varys and the Grand Master have the right of it. The blood will tell. I have only to remember how your sister set her wolf on my son." "I'm not like Arya," Sansa blurted. "She is the traitor's blood, not me. I'm good. Ask Septa Mordane, she'll tell you. I only want to be Joffrey's loyal and loving wife." She felt the weight of Cersei's eyes as the Queen studied her face. "I believe you mean it, child." She turned to face the others. "My lords, it seems to me that if the rest of her kin were to remain loyal in this terrible time, that would go a long way toward laying our fears to rest." Grandmaster Pycelle stroked his huge soft beard, his white brow furrowed in thought. "Lord Eddard has 3 sons." "Mere boys," Lord Petyr said with a shrug. "I should be more concerned with Lady Catelyn and the Tullys." The Queen took Sansa's hand in both of hers. "Child, do you know your letters?" Sansa nodded nervously. She could read and write better than any of her brothers, although she was hopeless at sums. "I am pleased to hear that. Perhaps there is hope for you and Joffrey still." "What do you want me to do?" "You must write your lady mother and your brother, the eldest. What is his name?" "Robb," Sansa said. "The word of your lord father's treason will no doubt reach them soon. Better that it should come from you. You must tell them how Lord Eddard betrayed his king." Sansa wanted Joffrey desperately, but she did not think she had the courage to do as the Queen was asking. "But he never... I don't... Your Grace, I wouldn't know what to say." The Queen patted her hand. "We will tell you what to write, child. The important thing is that you urge Lady Catelyn and your brother to keep the king's peace." "It will go hard for them if they don't," said Grandmaster Pycelle. "By the love you bear them, you must urge them to walk the path of wisdom." "Your lady mother will no doubt fear for you dreadfully," the Queen said. "You must tell her that you are well and in our care, that we are treating you gently and seeing to your every want. Bid them to come to King's Landing and pledge their fealty to Joffrey when he takes his throne. If they do that, why, then we shall know that there is no taint in your blood, and when you come into the flower of your womanhood, you shall wed the king in the great sept of Baelor, before the eyes of gods and men." Wed the king. The words made her breath come faster, yet still Sansa hesitated. "Perhaps, if I might see my father, talk to him about..." "Treason?" Lord Varys hinted. "You disappoint me, Sansa," the Queen said, with eyes gone hard as stones. "We've told you of your father's crimes. If you're truly as loyal as you say, why should you want to see him?" I only meant..." Sansa felt her eyes grow wet. "He's not... Please, he hasn't been hurt, or... "Lord Eddard has not been harmed," the Queen said. "But what's to become of him?" "That is a matter for the king to decide," Grandmaster Pycelle announced ponderously. The king? Sansa blinked back her tears. Joffrey was the king now, she thought. Her gallant prince would never hurt her father, no matter what he might have done. If she went to him and pleaded for mercy, she was certain he'd listen. He had to listen. He loved her. Even the Queen said so. Joff would need to punish father. The lords would expect it. But perhaps he could send him back to Winterfell or exile him to one of the free cities across the narrow sea. It would only have to be for a few years. By then she and Joffrey would be married. Once she was queen, she could persuade Joff to bring father back and grant him a pardon. Only, if Mother or Rob did anything treasonous, called the banners or refused to swear fealty or anything, it would all go wrong. Her Joffrey was good and kind, she knew it in her heart, but a king had to be stern with rebels. She had to make them understand, she had to. I'll write her letters, Sansa told them. With a smile as warm as the sunrise, Cersei Lannister leaned close and kissed her gently on the cheek. I knew you would. Joffrey will be so proud when I tell him what courage and good sense you've shown here today. In the end, she wrote 4 letters. To her mother, the Lady Catelyn Stark, and to her brothers at Winterfell, and to her aunt and her grandfather as well, Lady Lysa Arryn of the Eyrie, and Lord Hoster Tully of Riverrun. By the time she had done, her fingers were cramped and stiff and stained with ink. Varys had her father's seal. She warmed the pale white beeswax over a candle, poured it carefully, and watched as the eunuch stamped each letter with the direwolf of House Stark. Janie Poole and all her things were gone when Sir Mandon Moore returned Sansa to the high tower of Magus Holdfast. No more weeping, she thought gratefully. Yet somehow it seemed colder with Janie gone, even after she'd built a fire. She pulled a chair close to the hearth, took down one of her favourite books, and lost herself in the stories of Florin and Jonquil, of Lady Shella and the Rainbow Knight, of valiant Prince Aemon and his doomed love for his brother's queen. It was not until later that night, as she was drifting off to sleep, that Sansa realized she had forgotten to ask about her sister. Chapter 52. Jon.
Othar,
announced Sir Jeremy Ricker.
Beyond a doubt. And this one was Jafer Flowers.
He turned the corpse over with his foot, and the dead white face stared up at the overcast sky with blue, blue eyes.
They were Ben Stark's men, both of them.
My uncle's men, Jon thought numbly. He remembered how he'd pleaded to ride with them. Gods, I was such a green boy. If he had taken me, it might be me lying here. Jafer's right wrist ended in a ruin of torn flesh and splintered bone left by ghost jaws. His right hand was floating in a jar of vinegar back in Master Aemon's tower. His left hand, still at the end of his arm, was as black as his cloak.
God have mercy,
the old bear muttered. He swung down from his garron, handing his reins to Jon. The morning was unnaturally warm. Beads of sweat dotted the Lord Commander's broad forehead like dew on a melon. His horse was nervous, rolling her eyes, backing away from the dead man as far as her lead would allow. Jon led her off a few paces, fighting to keep her from bolting. The horses did not like the feel of this place. For the matter, neither did Jon. The dogs liked it least of all. Ghost had led the party here. The pack of hounds had been useless. When Bast, the kennel master, had tried to get him to take the scent from his severed hand, they had gone wild, yowling and barking, fighting to get away. Even now they were snarling and whimpering by turns, pulling at their leashes while Chet cursed them for curs. It is only a wood, Jon told himself, and they are only dead men. He had seen dead men before. Last night he had dreamt the Winterfell dream again. He was wandering the empty castle, searching for his father, descending into the crypts. Only this time the dream had gone further than before. In the dark he'd heard the scrape of stone on stone. When he turned, he saw that the vaults were opening, one after the other. As the dead kings came stumbling from their cold black graves, Jon had woken in pitch dark, his heart hammering. Even when Ghost leapt up on the bed to nuzzle at his face, he could not shake his deep sense of terror. He dared not go back to sleep. Instead, he had climbed the wall and walked, restless, until he saw the light of the dawn off to the cast. It was only a dream. I'm a brother of the Night's Watch now, not a frightened boy. Samwell Tarly huddled beneath the trees, half hidden behind the horses. His round fat face was the colour of curdled milk. So far he had not lurched off to the woods to retch, but he had not so much as glanced at the dead man either. "I can't look," he whispered miserably. "You have to look," Jon told him, keeping his voice low so the others would not hear. "Master Aemon sent you to be his eyes, didn't he? What good are eyes if they're shut?" "Yes, but I'm such a coward, Jon." Jon put a hand on Sam's shoulder.
We have a dozen rangers with us, and the dogs, even Ghost. No one will hurt you, Sam. Go ahead and look. The first look is the hardest."
Sam gave a tremulous nod, working up his courage with a visible effort. Slowly, he swiveled his head. His eyes widened, but John held his arm so he could not turn away.
"Sir Jeremy,"
the old bear asked gruffly.
"Ben Stark had 6 men with him when he rode from the wall. Where are the others?"
Sir Jeremy shook his head.
"What did I knew?"
Plainly Mormont was not pleased with that answer.
"2 of our brothers butchered almost within sight of the wall, yet your rangers heard nothing, saw nothing. Is this what the Night's Watch has fallen to? Do we still sweep these woods?"
"Yes, my lord, but—"
"Do we still mount watches?"
"We do, but—"
"This man wears a hunting horn."
Mormont pointed at Other.
"Must I suppose that he died without sounding it? Or have your rangers all gone deaf as well as blind?"
Sir Jeremy bristled, his face taut with anger.
"No horn was blown, my lord, or my rangers would have heard it. I do not have sufficient men to mount as many patrols as I should like. And since Benjamin was lost, we've stayed closer to the wall than we were wont to do before, by your own command."
The old bear grunted.
"Yes, well, be that as it may."
He made an impatient gesture.
"Tell me how they died."
Squatting beside the dead man he had named Jafer Flowers, Sir Jeremy grasped his head by the scalp. The hair came out between his fingers, brittle as straw. The knight cursed and shoved at the face with the heel of his hand. A great gash in the side of the corpse's neck opened like a mouth, crusted with dried blood. Only a few ropes of pale tendons still attached the head to the neck.
"This was done with an axe."
"Aye," muttered Tywin, the old forester.
"Belike the axe that Other carried, my lord."
John could feel his breakfast churning in his belly, but he pressed his lips together and made himself look at the second body. Other had been a big, ugly man, and he made a big, ugly corpse. No axe was in evidence. John remembered Other. He had been the one bellowing the body's song as the rangers rode out. His singing days were done. His flesh was blanched white as milk, everywhere but his hands. His hands were black like Japheth's. Blossoms of hard, cracked blood decorated the mortal wounds that covered him like a rash, breast and groin and throat. Yet his eyes were still open. They stared up at the sky, blue as sapphires. Sir Jeremy stood.
"The wildlings have axes too."
Mormont rounded on him.
"So you believe this is man's raiders' work, this close to the wall?"
"Who else, my lord?" John could have told him. He knew, they all knew, yet no man of them would say the words. The others are only a story, a tale to make children shiver. If they ever lived at all, they are gone 8,000 years. Even the thought made him feel foolish. He was a man grown now, a black brother of the Night's Watch, not the boy who'd once sat at old Nan's feet with Bran and Robb and Arya. Yet Lord Commander Mormont gave a snort.
"If Ben Stark had come under wildling attack a half-day's ride from Castle Black, he would have returned for more men, chased the killers through all 7 hells and brought me back their heads."
"Unless he was slain as well," Sir Jeremy insisted. The words hurt, even now. It had been so long, it seemed folly to cling to the hope that Ben Stark was still alive, but Jon Snow was nothing if not stubborn.
"It has been close on half a year since Benjen left us, my lord,"
Sir Jeremy went on.
"The forest is vast. The wildlings might have fallen on him anywhere. I'd wager these 2 were the last survivors of his party, on their way back to us. But the enemy caught them before they could reach the safety of the wall. The corpses are still fresh. These men cannot have been dead more than a day."
"No!" Samwell Tarly squeaked. John was startled. Sam's nervous, high-pitched voice was the last he would have expected to hear. The fat boy was frightened of the officers, and Sir Jeremy was not known for his patience.
"I did not ask for your views, boy,"
Rickon said coldly.
"Let him speak, sir,"
John blurted. Mormont's eyes flicked from Sam to John and back again.
"If the lad has something to say, I'll hear him out. Come closer, boy. We can't see you behind those horses."
Sam edged past John and the Garrons, sweating profusely. "My lord, it can't be a day or... Look, the blood."
Yes, Mormont growled impatiently. Blood, what of it? He soles his small clothes at the sight of it, Chad shouted out, and the Rangers laughed. Sam mopped at the sweat on his brow. You can see where Ghost, John's dire wolf, you can see where he tore off the man's hand, and yet the stump hasn't bled. Look. He waved a hand. My father, Lord Randall, he made me watch him dress animals sometimes when, after... Sam shook his head from side to side, his chins quivering. Now that he looked at the bodies, he could not seem to look away. A fresh kill. The blood would still flow, my lords. Later it would be clotted like a jelly, thick and... He looked as though he was going to be sick. This man... Look at the wrist. It's all... crusty, dry, like... John saw at once what Sam meant. He could see the torn veins in the dead man's wrist, iron worms in the pale flesh. His blood was a black dust. Yet Jeremy Ricker was unconvinced. If they'd been dead much longer than a day, they'd be ripe by now, boy. They don't even smell. Tywin, the gnarled old forester who liked to boast that he could smell snow coming on, sidled closer to the corpses and took a whiff. Well, there are no pansy flowers, but my lord has the truth of it. There's no corpse stink. They aren't rotting. Sam pointed, his fat fingers shaking only a little. Look, there's no maggots or worms or anything. They've been lying here in the woods, but they haven't been chewed or eaten by animals. Only Ghost. Otherwise they're untouched, John said softly. And Ghost is different. The dogs and the horses won't go near them. The Rangers exchanged glances. They could see it was true, every man of them. Mormont frowned, glancing from the corpses to the dogs. Chad, bring the hounds closer. Chad tried, cursing, yanking on the leashes, giving one animal a lick of his boot. Most of the dogs just whimpered and planted their feet. He tried dragging one. The bitch resisted, growling and squirming as if to escape her collar. Finally she lunged at him. Chad dropped the leash and stumbled backward. The dog leapt over him and bounded off into the trees. This is all wrong, Sam Tarley said earnestly. The blood. There's bloodstains on their clothes and their flesh dry and hard, but there's none on the ground or anywhere. With those... Sam made himself swallow, took a deep breath. With those wounds, terrible wounds, there should be blood all over. Shouldn't there? Darwin sucked at his wooden teeth. Might be they didn't die here. Might be someone brought 'em and left 'em for us. A warning, as like. The old forester peered down suspiciously. And might be I'm a fool, but I don't know what Otha never had no blue eyes before. Sir Jeremy looked startled. Neither did Flowers, he blurted, turning to stare at the dead man. A silence fell over the wood. For a moment, all they heard was Sam's heavy breathing and the wet sound of Tywin sucking on his teeth. John squatted beside Ghost. Burn them, someone whispered. One of the Rangers. John could not have said who. Yes, burn them, a second voice urged. The old bear gave a stubborn shake of his head. Not yet. I want Master Aemon to have a look at them. We'll bring them back to the wall. Some commands are more easily given than obeyed. They wrapped the dead man in cloaks, but when Hawk and Tywin tried to tie one onto a horse, the animal went mad, screaming and rearing, lashing out with its hoofs, even biting at Cata when he ran to help. The Rangers had no better luck with the other Garons. Not even the most placid wanted any part of these burdens. In the end, they were forced to hack off branches and fashion crude slings to carry the corpses back on foot. It was well past midday by the time they started back. I will have these woods searched, Mormont commanded Sir Jeremy as they set out. Every tree, every rock, every bush, and every foot of muddy ground within 10 leagues of here. Use all the men you have, and if you do not have enough, borrow hunters and foresters from the stewards. If Ben and the others are out there, dead or alive, I will have them found. And if there is anyone else in these woods, I will know of it. You are to track them and take them, alive if possible. Is that understood? "It is, my lord," Sir Jeremy said. "It will be done." After that, Mormont rode in silence, brooding. John followed close behind him. As the Lord Commander Steward, that was his place. The day was grey, damp, overcast, the sort of day that made you wish for rain. No wind stirred the wood. The air hung humid and heavy, and John's clothes clung to his skin. It was warm, too warm. The wall was weeping copiously, had been weeping for days, and sometimes John even imagined it was shrinking. The old man called this weather Spirit Summer, and said it meant the season was giving up its ghosts at last. After this the cold would come, they warned, and a long summer always meant a long winter. This summer had lasted 10 years. John had been a babe in arms when it began. Ghost ran with them for a time and then vanished among the trees. Without a dire wolf, John felt almost naked. He found himself glancing at every shadow with unease. Unbidden, he thought back on the tales that old Nan used to tell them when he was a boy at Winterfell. He could almost hear her voice again, and the click, click, click of her needles. In that darkness, the others came riding, she used to say, dropping her voice lower and lower. Cold and that they were, and they hated iron and fire and the touch of the sun, and every living creature with hot blood in its veins. Holdfasts and cities and kingdoms of men all fell before them as they moved south on pale dead horses, leading hosts of the slain. They fed their dead servants on the flesh of human children. When he caught his first glimpse of the wall looming above the tops of an ancient gnarled oak, John was vastly relieved. Mormont reined up suddenly and turned in his saddle. "Tolly," he barked. "Come here." John saw the start of fright on Sam's face as he lumbered up on his mare. Doubtless he thought he was in trouble. "You're fat, but you're not stupid, boy," the old bear said gruffly. "You did well back there. And you, Snow." Sam blushed a vivid crimson and tripped over his own tongue as he tried to stammer out a courtesy. John had to smile. When they emerged from under the trees, Mormont spurred his tough little Garand to a trot. Ghost came streaking out from the woods to meet them, licking his chops, his muzzle red from prey. High above, the man on the wall saw the column approaching. John heard the deep, throaty call of the watchman's great horn, calling out across the miles. A single long blast that shuddered through the trees and echoed off the ice. The sound faded slowly to silence. One blast meant rangers returning, and John thought, I was a ranger for one day, at least. Whatever may come, they cannot take that away from me. Bowen Marsh was waiting at the first gate as they led their Garands through the icy tunnel. The Lord Steward was red-faced and agitated. "My lord," he blurted at moment as he swung open the iron bars. "There's been a bird. You must come at once." "What is it, man?" Mormont said gruffly. Curiously, Marsh glanced at John before he answered. "Master Aemon has the letter. He's waiting in your cellar." "Very well. John, see to my horse and tell Sir Jeremy to put the dead men in the storeroom until the master is ready for them." Mormont strode away, grumbling. As they led their horses back to the stable, John was uncomfortably aware that people were watching him. Sir Alistair Thorne was drilling his boys in the yard, but he broke off to stare at John, a faint half-smile on his lips. One-armed Donal Noy stood in the door of the armory. "The gods be with you, Snow," he called out. Something's wrong, John thought. Something's very wrong. The dead men were carried to one of the storerooms along the base of the wall, a dark cold cell chiseled from the ice and used to keep meat and grain and sometimes even beer. John saw that Mormont's horse was fed and watered and groomed before he took care of his own. Afterward, he sought out his friends. Gran and Toad were on watch, but he found Pip in the common hall. "What's happened?" he asked. Pip lowered his voice. "The king's dead." John was stunned. Robert Baratheon had looked old and fat when he visited Winterfell, yet he'd seemed hale enough, and there had been no talk of illness. "How can you know?" One of the guards overheard Clydas reading the letter to Master Aemon. Pip leaned close. "John, I'm sorry. He was your father's friend, wasn't he?" "They were as close as brothers once." John wondered if Joffrey would keep his father as the king's hand. It did not seem likely. That might mean Lord Eddard would return to Winterfell, and his sisters as well. He might even be allowed to visit them, with Lord Mormont's permission. It would be good to see Arya's grin again, and to talk with his father. I will ask him about my mother, he resolved. I'm a man now. It is past time he told me. Even if she was a whore, I don't care. I want to know. I heard Hake say that that man were your uncles, Pip said. Yes, Jon replied. 2 of the 6 he took with him. They'd been dead a long time, only the bodies are queer. Queer? Pip was all curiosity. How queer? Sam will tell you. Jon did not want to talk of it. I should see if the old bear has need of me. He walked to the Lord Commander's tower alone, with a curious sense of apprehension. The brothers and guard eyed him solemnly as he approached. The old bear's in his cellar, one of them announced. He was asking for you. Jon nodded. He should have come straight from the stable. He climbed the tower steps briskly. He wants wine or a fire in his hearth, that's all, he told himself. When he entered the cellar, Mormont's raven screamed at him. Corn! The bird shrieked. Corn! Corn! Don't you believe it, I just fed him. The old bear growled. He was seated by the window, reading a letter. Bring me a cup of wine and pour one for yourself. For myself, my lord? Mormont lifted his eyes from the letter to stare at Jon. There was pity in that look. He could taste it. You heard me. Jon poured with exaggerated care, vaguely aware that he was drawing out the act. When the cups were filled, he would have no choice but to face whatever was in that letter. Yet all too soon they were filled. Sit, boy, Mormont commanded him. Drink. Jon remained standing. It's my father, isn't it? The old bear tapped the letter with a finger. Your father and the king, he rumbled. I won't lie to you, it's grievous news. I never thought to see another king, not at my age, with Robert half my years and strong as a bull. He took a gulp of wine. They say the king loved to hunt. The things we love destroy us every time, lad. Remember that. My son loved that young wife of his, Wayne woman. If not for her, he would never have thought to sell those poachers. Jon could scarcely follow what he was saying. My lord, I don't understand. What's happened to my father? I told you to sit, Mormont grumbled. Sit, the raven screamed. And have a drink, damn you. That's a command, Snow. Jon sat and took a sip of wine. Lord Eddard has been imprisoned. He is charged with treason. It is said he plotted with Robert's brothers to deny the throne to Prince Joffrey. No, Jon said at once. That couldn't be. My father would never betray the king. Be that as it may, said Mormont. It is not for me to say, nor for you. But it's a lie, Jon insisted. How could they think his father was a traitor? Had they all gone mad? Lord Eddard Stark would never dishonor himself. Would he? He fathered a bastard, a small voice whispered inside him. Where was the honor in that? And your mother, what of her? He will not even speak her name. My lord, what will happen to him? Will they kill him? As to that I cannot say, lad. I mean to send a letter. I know some of the king's councillors in my youth. Old Pycelle, Lord Stannis, Sir Barristan. Whatever your father has done or hasn't done, he is a great lord. He must be allowed to take the black and join us here. Gods knows we need men of Lord Eddard's ability. Jon knew that other men accused of treason had been allowed to redeem their honor on the wall in days past. Why not Lord Eddard? His father here. That was a strange thought, and strangely uncomfortable. It would be a monstrous injustice to strip him of Winterfell and force him to take the black, and yet if it meant his life. And would Joffrey allow it? He remembered the prince at Winterfell, the way he'd mocked Robb and Sir Roderick in the yard. Jon himself he had scarcely even noticed. Bastards were beneath even his contempt. My lord, will the king listen to you? The old bear shrugged. A boy king. I imagine he'll listen to his mother. A pity the dwarf isn't with them. He's the lad's uncle, and he saw our need when he visited us. It was a bad thing, your lady mother taking him captive. Lady Stark is not my mother, Jon reminded him sharply. Tyrion Lannister had been a friend to him. If Lord Eddard was killed, she would be as much to blame as the queen. My lord, what of my sisters? Arya and Sansa, they were with my father. Do you know? Pycelle makes no mention of them, but doubtless they'll be treated gently. I will ask about them when I write.
Mormont shook his head.
This could not have happened at a worse time. If ever the realm needed a strong king. There are dark days and cold nights ahead. I feel it in my bones.
He gave Jon a long, shrewd look.
I hope you're not thinking of doing anything stupid, boy.
He's my father, Jon wanted to say, but he knew that Mormont would not want to hear it. His throat was dry. He made himself take another sip of wine.
Your duty is here now,
the Lord Commander reminded him.
Your old life ended when you took the Black.
His bird made a raucous echo. Black! Mormont took no notice.
Whatever they do in King's Landing is none of our concern.
When Jon did not answer, the old man finished his wine and said,
You're free to go. I'll have no further need of you today. On the morrow you can help me write that letter.
Jon did not remember standing or leaving the sala. The next he knew, he was descending the tower steps, thinking, This is my father, my sisters. How can it be none of my concern? Outside, one of the guards looked at him and said, Be strong, boy. The gods are cruel. They know, Jon realized.
My father is no traitor,
he said hoarsely. Even the words stuck in his throat as if to choke him. The wind was rising, and it seemed colder in the yard than it had been when he'd gone in. Spirit Summer was drawing to an end. The rest of the afternoon passed as if in a dream. Jon could not have said where he walked, what he did, who he spoke with. Ghost was with him, he knew that much. The silent presence of the dire wolf gave him comfort. The girls do not even have that much, he thought. Their wolves might have kept them safe, but Lady is dead, and Nymeria is lost. They are all alone. A north wind had begun to blow by the time the sun went down. Jon could hear it skirling against the wall and over the icy battlements as he went to the common hall for the evening meal. Harp had cooked up a venison stew, thick with barley, onions, and carrots. When he spooned an extra portion onto Jon's plate and gave him the crusty heel of the bread, he knew what it meant. He knows. He looked around the hall, saw heads turn quickly, eyes politely averted. They all know. His friends rallied to him. We asked the Septon to light a candle for your father, Methar told him. It's a lie. We all know it's a lie. Even Gren knows it's a lie. Pip chimed in. Gren nodded, and Sam clasped Jon's hand. You're my brother now, so he's my father too, the fat boy said. If you want to go out to the weirwoods and pray to the old gods, I'll go with you. The weirwoods were beyond the wall, yet he knew Sam meant what he said. They are my brothers, he thought, as much as Robb and Bran and Rickon. And then he heard the laughter, sharp and cruel as a whip, and the voice of Sir Alliser Thorne. Not only a bastard, but a traitor's bastard, he was telling the men around him. In the blink of an eye, Jon had vaulted onto the table, dagger in his hand. Pip made a grab for him, but he wrenched his leg away, and then he was sprinting down the table and kicking the bowl from Sir Alliser's hand. Stew went flying everywhere, spattering the brothers. Thorne recoiled. People were shouting, but Jon Snow did not hear them. He lunged at Sir Alliser's face with the dagger, slashing at those cold onyx eyes, but Sam threw himself between them, and before Jon could get around him, Pip was on his back, clinging like a monkey, and Gren was grabbing his arm while Toad wrenched the knife from his fingers. Later, much later, after they had marched him back to his sleeping cell, Mormont came down to see him, Raven on his shoulder. I told you not to do anything stupid, boy, the old bear said. Boy, the bird chorused. Mormont shook his head, disgusted. And to think I had high hopes for you. They took his knife and his sword and told him he was not to leave his cell until the high officers met to decide what was to be done with him. And then they placed a guard outside his door to make certain he obeyed. His friends were not allowed to see him, but the old bear did relent and permit him ghost, so he was not utterly alone. My father is no traitor, he told the dire wolf when the rest had gone. Ghost looked at him in silence. Jon slumped against the wall, hands around his knees, and stared at the candle on the table beside his narrow bed. The flame flickered and swayed, the shadows moved around him, the room seemed to grow darker and colder. I will not sleep tonight, Jon thought.
Yet he must have dozed. When he woke, his legs were stiff and cramped, and the candle had long since burned out. Ghost stood on his hind legs, scrabbling at the door. John was startled to see how tall he'd grown. "Ghost, what is it?" he called softly. The dire wolf turned his head and looked down at him, baring his fangs in a silent snarl. "Has he gone mad?" John wondered. "It's me, Ghost," he murmured, trying not to sound afraid. Yet he was trembling violently. When had it gotten so cold? Ghost backed away from the door. There were deep gouges where he'd raked the wood. John watched him with mounting disquiet. "There is someone out there, isn't there?" he whispered. Crouching, the dire wolf crept backward, white fur rising on the back of his neck. "The guard," he thought. "They left a man to guard my door. Ghost smells him through the door, that's all it is." Slowly, John pushed himself to his feet. He was shivering uncontrollably, wishing he still had a sword. 3 quick steps brought him to the door. He grabbed the handle and pulled it inward. The creak of the hinges almost made him jump. His guard was sprawled bonelessly across the narrow steps, looking up at him. Looking up at him, even though he was lying on his stomach. His head had been twisted completely around. "It can't be," John told himself. "This is the Lord Commander's tower. It's guarded day and night. This couldn't happen. It's a dream. I'm having a nightmare." Ghost slid past him, out the door. The wolf started up the steps, stopped, looked back at John. That was when he heard it. The soft scrape of boot on a stone, the sound of a latch turning. The sounds came from above, from the Lord Commander's chambers. A nightmare this might be, yet it was no dream. The guard's sword was in its sheath. John knelt and worked it free. The heft of steel in his fist made him bolder. He moved up the steps, Ghost padding silently before him. Shadows lurked in every turn of the stair. John crept up warily, probing any suspicious darkness with the point of his sword. Suddenly, he heard the shriek of Mormont's raven. "Gorn!" the bird was screaming. "Gorn! Gorn! Gorn!" Ghost bounded ahead, and John came scrambling after. The door to Mormont's sala was wide open. The dire wolf plunged through. John stopped in the doorway, blade in hand, giving his eyes a moment to adjust. Heavy drapes had been pulled across the windows, and the darkness was black as ink. "Who's there?" he called out. Then he saw it. A shadow in the shadows, sliding toward the inner door that led to Mormont's sleeping cell, a man's shape all in black, cloaked and hooded. But beneath the hood, its eyes shone with an icy blue radiance. Ghost leapt. Man and wolf went down together with neither scream nor snarl, rolling, smashing into a chair, knocking over a table laden with papers. Mormont's raven was flapping overhead, screaming, "Gorn! Gorn! Gorn!" John felt as blind as Master Aemon. Keeping the wall to his back, he slid toward the window and ripped down the curtain. Moonlight fluted the solar. He glimpsed black hands buried in white fur, swollen dark fingers tightening around his rival's throat. Ghost was twisting and snapping, legs flailing in the air, but he could not break free. John had no time to be afraid. He threw himself forward, shouting, bringing down the long sword with all his weight behind it. Steel sheared through sleeve and skin and bone, yet the sound was wrong somehow. The smell that engulfed him was so queer and cold he almost gagged. He saw arm and hand on the floor, black fingers wriggling in the pool of moonlight. Ghost wrenched free of the other hand and crept away, red tongue lolling from his mouth. The hooded man lifted his pale moon face, and John slashed at it without hesitation. The sword laid the intruder open to the bone, taking off half his nose and opening a gashed cheek to cheek under those eyes like blue stars burning. John knew that face. Other, he thought, reeling back. Gods, he's dead. He's dead. I saw him dead. He felt something scrabble at his ankle. Black fingers clawed at his calf. The arm was crawling up his leg, ripping at wool and flesh. Shouting with revulsion, John pried the fingers of his leg with the point of his sword and flipped the thing away. It lay writhing, fingers opening and closing. The corpse lurched forward. There was no blood. One-armed, face cut near in half, it seemed to feel nothing. John held the long sword before him. "Stay away!" he commanded, his voice gone shrill. "Gorn!" screamed the raven. "Gorn! Gorn!" The severed arm was wriggling out of its torn sleeve, a pale snake with a black 5-fingered head. Ghost pounced and got it between his teeth. Finger bones crunched. John hacked at the corpse's neck, felt the steel bite deep and hard. Dad Otha slammed into him, knocking him off his feet. John's breath went out of him as the fallen table caught him between his shoulder blades. The sword. Where was the sword? He'd lost the damn sword. When he opened his mouth to scream, the white jammed its black corpse fingers into John's mouth. Gagging, he tried to shove it off, but the dead man was too heavy. Its hand forced itself farther down his throat, icy cold, choking him. Its face was against his own, filling the world. Frost covered its eyes, sparkling blue. John raked cold flesh with his nails and kicked at the thing's legs. He tried to bite, tried to punch, tried to breathe. And suddenly the corpse's weight was gone, its fingers ripped from his throat. It was all John could do to roll over, retching and shaking. Ghost had it again. He watched as the direwolf buried his teeth in the white's gut and began to rip and tear. He watched, only half conscious, for a long moment before he finally remembered to look for his sword, and saw Lord Mormont, naked and groggy from sleep, standing in the doorway with an oil lamp in hand. Gnawed and fingerless, the arm trashed on the floor, wriggling toward him. John tried to shout, but his voice was gone. Staggering to his feet, he kicked the arm away and snatched the lamp from the old bear's fingers. The flame flickered and almost died. "Burn!" the raven called. "Burn! Burn!" Spinning, John saw the drapes he'd ripped from the window. He flung the lamp into the puddled cloth with both hands. Metal crunched, glass shattered, oil spewed, and the hangings went up in a great whoosh of flame. The heat of it on his face was sweeter than any kiss John had ever known. "Ghost!" he shouted. The dire wolf wrenched free and came to him as the white struggled to rise, dark snakes spilling from the great wound in its belly. John plunged his hand into the flames, grabbed a fistful of the burning drapes, and whipped them at the dead man. "Let it burn," he prayed as the cloth smothered the corpse. "Gods, please, please, let it burn." Chapter 53. Bran. The Karstarks came in on a cold windy morning, bringing 300 horsemen and near 2,000 foot from their castle at Carhold. The steel points of their pikes winked in the pale sunlight as the column approached. A man went before them, pounding out a slow, deep-throated marching rhythm on a drum that was bigger than he was. Boom, boom, boom. Bran watched them come from a guard turret atop the outer wall, peering through Master Luwin's bronze far eye while perched on Hodor's shoulders. Lord Rickard himself led them, his sons Harion and Eddard and Torrin riding beside him beneath night-black banners emblazoned with the white sunburst of their house. Old Nan said they had Stark blood in them, going back hundreds of years, but they did not look like Starks to Bran. They were big men and fierce, faces covered with thick beards, hair worn loose past the shoulders. Their cloaks were made of skins, the pelts of bear and seal and wolf. They were the last, he knew. The other lords were already here, with their hosts. Bran yearned to ride out among them, to see the winter houses full to bursting, the jostling crowds in the market square every morning, the streets rutted and torn by wheel and hoof. But Robb had forbidden him to leave the castle. "We have no men to spare to guard you," his brother had explained. "I'll take Summer," Bran argued. "Don't act a boy with me, Bran," Robb said. "You know better than that. Only 2 days ago one of Lord Bolton's men knifed one of Lord's servants at the Smoking Log. Our Lady Mother would skin me for a pelt if I let you put yourself at risk." He was using the voice of Robb the Lord when he said it. Bran knew that meant there was no appeal. It was because of what had happened in the Wolfswood, he knew. The memory still gave him bad dreams. He had been as helpless as a baby, no more able to defend himself than Rickon would have been. Less even. Rickon would have kicked them at the least. It shamed him. He was only a few years younger than Robb. If his brother was almost a man grown, so was he. He should have been able to protect himself. A year ago, before, He would have visited the town even if it meant climbing over the walls by himself. In those days he could run downstairs, get on and off his pony by himself, and wield a wooden sword good enough to knock Prince Tommen in the dirt. Now he could only watch, peering out through Master Luwin's lens tube. The master had taught him all the banners, the mailed fist of the Glovis, silver on scarlet, Lady Mormont's black bear, the hideous flayed man that went before Roose Bolton of the Dreadfort, a bull moose for the Hornwoods, a battle-axe for the Servants, 3 sentinel trees for the Tallhards, and the fearsome sigil of House Umber, a roaring giant in shattered chains. And soon enough he learned the faces too, when the lords and their sons and knights retainer came to Winterfell to feast. Even the great hall was not large enough to seat all of them at once, so Robb hosted each of the principal bannermen in turn. Bran was always given the place of honor at his brother's right hand. Some of the lords' bannermen gave him queer hard stares as he sat there, as if they wondered by what right a green boy should be placed above them, and him a cripple too. "How many is it now?" Bran asked Master Luwin as Lord Karstark and his sons rode through the gates in the outer wall. 12,000 men, or near enough as makes no matter.
"How many knights?"
"Few enough," the master said with a touch of impatience. "To be a knight you must stand your vigil in a sept and be anointed with the 7 oils to consecrate your vows. In the north only a few of the great houses worship the 7. The rest honor the old gods and name no knights. But those lords and their sons and sworn swords are no less fierce or loyal or honorable. A man's worth is not marked by a sir before his name, as I have told you 100 times before."
"Still," said Bran, "how many knights?" Master Luwin sighed.
300, perhaps 4, among 3,000 armored lances who are not knights.
"Lord Karstark is the last," Bran said thoughtfully. "Robb will feast him tonight."
"No doubt he will."
"How long before they go?"
"He must march soon or not at all," Master Luwin said. "The winter town is full to bursting, and this army of his will eat the countryside clean if it camps here much longer. Others are waiting to join him all along the King's Road, Barrow Knights and Crannogman and the Lords Manderley and Flint. The fighting has begun in the Riverlands, and your brother has many leagues to go."
"I know." Bran felt as miserable as he sounded. He handed the bronze tube back to the master, and noticed how thin Luwin's hair had grown on top. He could see the pink of scalps showing through. It felt queer to look down on him this way, when he'd spent his whole life looking up at him, but when you sat on Hoder's back, you looked down on everyone. "I don't want to watch any more, Hoder. Take me back to the keep."
"Hoder," said Hoder. Master Luwin tucked the tube up his sleeve. "Bran, your lord brother will not have time to see you now. He must greet Lord Karstark and his sons and make them welcome."
"I won't trouble, Robb. I want to visit the Godswood." He put his hand on Hoder's shoulder. "Hoder." A series of chisel-cut hand-holes made the leather in the granite of the tower's inner wall. Hoder hummed tunelessly as he went down hand under hand, Bran bouncing against his back in the wicker seat that Master Luwin had fashioned for him. Luwin had gotten the idea from the baskets the women used to carry firewood on their backs. After that it had been a simple matter of cutting lag holes and attaching some new straps to spread Bran's weight more evenly. It was not as good as riding Dancer, but there were places Dancer could not go, and this did not shame Bran the way it did when Hoder carried him in his arms like a baby. Hoder seemed to like it too, though with Hoder it was hard to tell. The only tricky part was doors. Sometimes Hoder forgot that he had Bran on his back, and that could be painful when he went through a door. For near a fortnight there had been so many comings and goings that Robb ordered both portcullises kept up and the drawbridge down between them, even in the dead of night. A long column of armored lances was crossing the moat between the walls when Bran emerged from the tower. Karstark men, following their lords into the castle. They wore black iron half-helms and black woolen cloaks patterned with the white sunburst. Hoder trotted along beside them, smiling to himself, his boots thudding against the wood of the drawbridge. The riders gave them queer looks as they went by, and once Bran heard someone guffaw. He refused to let it trouble him. "Men will look at you.
Master Lewin had warned him the first time they had strapped a wicker basket around Hoder's chest. "They will look, and they will talk, and some will mock you." Let them mock, Bran thought. No one mocked him in his bed chamber, but he would not live his life in bed. As they passed beneath the gatehouse portcullis, Bran put 2 fingers into his mouth and whistled. Summer came loping across the yard. Suddenly, the Karstark lancers were fighting for control as their horses rolled their ices and whickered in dismay. One stallion reared, screaming, his rider cursing and hanging on desperately. The scent of the dire wolf sent horses into a frenzy of fear if they were not accustomed to it, but they'd quiet soon enough once Summer was gone. "The gods would," Bran reminded Hoder. Even Winterfell itself was crowded. The yard rang to the sound of sword and axe, the rumble of wagons, and the barking of dogs. The armory doors were open, and Bran glimpsed Mikken at his forge, his hammer ringing as sweat dripped off his bare chest. Bran had never seen as many strangers in all his years, not even when King Robert had come to visit father. He tried not to flinch as Hoder ducked through a low door. They walked down a long dim hallway, Summer padding easily beside them. The wolf glanced up from time to time, eyes smoldering like liquid gold. Bran would have liked to touch him, but he was riding too high for his hand to reach. The Godswood was an island of peace in the sea of chaos that Winterfell had become. Hoder made his way through the dense stands of oak and iron wood and sentinels to the still pool beside the hard tree. He stopped under the gnarled limbs of the weirwood, humming. Bran reached up over his head and pulled himself out of his seat, drawing the dead weight of his legs up through the holes in the wicker basket. He hung for a moment, dangling, the dark red leaves brushing against his face, until Hoder lifted him and lowered him to the smooth stone beside the water. "I want to be by myself for a while," he said. "You go soak. Go to the pools." "Hoder." Hoder stomped through the trees and vanished. Across the Godswood, beneath the windows of the guest house, an underground hot spring fed 3 small ponds. Steam rose from the water day and night, and the wall that loomed above was thick with moss. Hoder hated cold water, and would fight like a treed wildcat when threatened with soap, but he would happily immerse himself in the hottest pool and sit for hours, giving a loud burp to echo the spring whenever a bubble rose from the murky green depths to break upon the surface. Summer lapped at the water and settled down at Bran's side. He rubbed the wolf under the jaw, and for a moment boy and beast both felt at peace. Bran had always liked the Godswood, even before, but of late he found himself drawn to it more and more. Even the hard tree no longer scared him the way it used to. The deep red eyes carved into the pale trunk still watched him, yet somehow he took comfort from that now. The gods were looking over him, he told himself. The old gods, gods of the Starks and the first men and the children of the forest, his father's gods. He felt safe in their sight, and the deep silence of the trees helped him think. Bran had been thinking a lot since his fall, thinking and dreaming and talking with the gods. "Please, make it so Robb won't go away," he prayed softly. He moved his hand through the cold water, sending ripples across the pool. "Please make him stay. Or if he has to go, bring him home safe, with mother and father and the girls, and make it so Rickon understands." His baby brother had been wild as a winter storm since he learned Robb was riding off to war, weeping and angry by turns. He'd refused to eat, cried and screamed for most of a night, even punched old Nan when she tried to sing him to sleep, and the next day he had vanished. Robb had sat half the castle searching for him, and when at last they'd found him down in the crypts, Rickon had slashed at them with a rusted iron sword he'd snatched from a dead king's hand, and Shaggy Dog had come slavering out of the darkness like a green-eyed demon. The wolf was near as wild as Rickon. He'd bitten Gage on the arm and torn a chunk of flesh from Micken's thigh. It had taken Robb himself and Grey Wind to bring him to bay. Farlin had the black wolf chained up in the kennels now, and Rickon cried all the more for being without him. Master Lewin counselled Robb to remain at Winterfell, and Bran pleaded with him too, for his own sake as much as Rickon's, but his brother only shook his head stubbornly and said, "I don't want to go. I have to." It was only half a lie. Someone had to go, to hold the neck and help the Tullys against the Lannisters. Bran could understand that, but it did not have to be Robb. His brother might have given the command to Hal Marlin or Theon Greyjoy, or to one of his Lord Bannermen. Master Luwin urged him to do just that, but Robb would not hear of it. My Lord Father would never have sent men off to die while he huddled like a craven behind the walls of Winterfell, he said, all Robb the Lord. Robb seemed half a stranger to Bran now, transformed, a lord in truth, though he had not yet seen his 16th name-day. Even their father's bannermen seemed to sense it. Many tried to test him, each in his own way. Roose Bolton and Robert Glover both demanded the honour of battle command, the first briskly, the second with a smile and a jest. Stout, grey-haired Meg Mormont, dressed in mail like a man, told Robb bluntly that he was young enough to bear her grandson, and had no business giving her commands. But as it happened, she had a granddaughter she would be willing to have him marry. Soft-spoken Lord Serban had actually brought his daughters with him, a plump, homely maid of 30 years who sat at her father's left hand and never lifted her eyes from her plate. Jovial Lord Hornwood had no daughters, but he did bring gifts, a horse one day, a haunch of venison the next, a silver-chased hunting horn the day after, and he asked nothing in return. Nothing but a certain holdfast taken from his grandfather, and hunting rights north of a certain ridge, and leave to dam the White Knife, if it pleased the Lord. Robb answered each of them with cool courtesy, much as father might have, and somehow he bent them to his will. And when Lord Umber, who was called the Greyjohn by his men and stood as tall as Hodor and twice as wide, threatened to take his forces home if he was placed behind the Hornwoods or the Servants in the order of the march, Robb told him he was welcome to do so. "And when we are done with the Lannisters," he promised, scratching Greywind behind the ear, "we will march back north, root you out of your keep, and hang you for an oath-breaker." Cursing, the Greyjohn flung a flagon of ale into the fire and bellowed that Robb was so green he must piss grass. When Hallis Marlin moved to restrain him, he knocked him to the floor, kicked over a table, and unsheathed the biggest, ugliest greatsword that Bran had ever seen. All along the benches, his sons and brothers and sworn swords leapt to their feet, grabbing for their steel. Yet Robb only said a quiet word, and in a snarl and the blink of an eye Lord Umber was on his back, his sword spinning on the floor 3 feet away, and his hand dripping blood where Grey Wind had bitten off 2 fingers. "My Lord Father told me that it was death to bear steel against your liege lord," Robb said. "But doubtless you only meant to cut my meat." Bran's bowels went to water as the Greyjohn struggled to rise, sucking at the red stumps of fingers. But then, astonishingly, the huge man laughed. "Your meat," he roared, "is bloody tough." And somehow after that the Greyjohn became Robb's right hand, his staunchest champion, loudly telling all and sundry that the boy lord was a Stark after all, and they'd damn well better bend their knees if they didn't fancy having them chewed off. Yet that very night, his brother came to Bran's bedchamber pale and shaken, after the fires had burned low in the great hall. "I thought he was going to kill me," Robb confessed. "Did you see the way he threw down hell, like he was no bigger than Rickon? God, I was so scared. And the Greyjohn's not the worst of them, only the loudest. Lord Roose never says a word, he only looks at me, and all I can think of is that room that they have in the Dread Fort, where the Boltons hang the skins of their enemies." "That's just one of Old Nan's stories," Bran said. A note of doubt crept into his voice. "Isn't it?" "I don't know." He gave a weary shake of his head. "Lord Servan means to take his daughters south with us. To cook for him, he says. Theon is certain I'll find the girl in my bedroll one night. I wish father was here." That was the one thing they could agree on, Bran and Rickon and Robb the Lord. They all wished father was here. But Lord Eddard was 1,000 leagues away, a captive in some dungeon, a hunted fugitive running for his life, or even dead. No one seemed to know for certain. Every traveller told a different tale, each more terrifying than the last. The heads of father's guardsmen were rotting on the walls of the Red Keep, impaled on spikes. King Robert was dead at father's hands. The Baratheons had laid siege to King's Landing. Lord Eddard had fled south with the king's wicked brother Renly. Arya and Sansa had been murdered by the Hound. Mother had killed Tyrion the Imp and hung his body from the walls of Riverrun. Lord Tywin Lannister was marching on the Eyrie, burning and slaughtering as he went. One wine-sodden tale-teller even claimed that Rhaegar Targaryen had returned from the dead, and was marshalling a vast host of ancient heroes on Dragonstone to reclaim his father's throne. When the Raven came, bearing a letter marked with father's own seal and written in Sansa's hand, the cruel truth seemed no less incredible. Bran would never forget the look on Robb's face as he stared at their sister's words. "She says father conspired a treason with the king's brothers," he read. "King Robert is dead, and mother and I are summoned to the Red Keep to swear fealty to Joffrey. She says we must be loyal, and when she marries Joffrey she will plead with him to spare our Lord Father's life." His fingers closed into a fist, crushing Sansa's letter between them. "And she says nothing of Arya, nothing, not so much as a word. Damn her! What's wrong with the girl?" Bran felt all cold inside. "She lost her wolf," he said, weakly, remembering the day when 4 of his father's guardsmen had returned from the south with Lady's bones. Summer and Greywind and Shaggy Dog had begun to howl before they crossed the drawbridge, in voices drawn and desolate. Beneath the shadow of the first keep was an ancient lich yard, its headstones spotted with pale lichen, where the old kings of winter had laid their faithful servants. It was there they buried Lady, while her brothers stalked between the graves like restless shadows. She had gone south, and only her bones had returned. Their grandfather, old Lord Rickard, had gone as well, with his son Brandon, who was father's brother, and 200 of his best men. None had ever returned. And father had gone south, with Arya and Sansa, and Jory and Hullen and Fat Tom and the rest, and later mother and Sir Roderick had gone, and they hadn't come back either. And now Robb meant to go, not to King's Landing and not to swear fealty, but to Riverrun with a sword in his hand. And if their Lord Father were truly a prisoner, that could mean his death for a certainty. It frightened Bran more than he could say. "If Robb has to go, watch over him," Bran entreated the old gods as they watched him with the hard tree's red eyes. "And watch over his men, Hel and Quent and the rest, and Lord Umber and Lady Mormont and the other lords, and Theon too, I suppose. Watch them and keep them safe, if it please you, gods. Help them defeat the Lannisters and save father and bring them home." A faint wind sighed through the godswood, and the red leaves stirred and whispered. Summer bared his teeth. "You hear them, boy?" a voice asked. Bran lifted his head. Osha stood across the pool, beneath an ancient oak, her face shadowed by leaves. Even in irons, the wildling moved quiet as a cat. Summer circled the pool, sniffed at her. The tall woman flinched. "Summer, to me," Bran called. The direwolf took one final sniff, spun, and bounded back. Bran wrapped his arms around him. "What are you doing here?" He had not seen Osha since they'd taken her captive in the Wolfswood, though he knew she'd been set to working in the kitchens. "They're my gods too," Osha said. "Beyond the wall, they're the only gods." Her hair was growing out, brown and shaggy. It made her look more womanly, that and the simple dress of brown rough-spun they'd given her when they took her mail and leather. "Gage lets me have prayers from time to time, when I feel the need, and I let him do as he likes under my skirt when he feels the need. It's nothing to me. I like the smell of flour on his hands, and he's gentler than Stiv." She gave an awkward bow. "I'll leave you. There's pots that want scurrying." "No, stay," Bran commanded her. "Tell me what you meant about hearing the gods." Osha studied him. "You ask them and they're answering. Open your ears. Listen. You'll hear." Bran listened. "It's only the wind," he said after a moment, uncertain. "The leaves are rustling." "Who do you think sends the wind if not the gods?" She seated herself across the pool from him, clinking faintly as she moved. Mikken had fixed iron manacles to her ankles, with a heavy chain between them. She could walk, so long as she kept her stride small, but there was no way for her to run or climb or mount a horse. "They see you, boy. They hear you talking. That rustling, that's them talking back."
What are they saying? They're sad. Your lord brother will get no help from them, not where he's going. The old gods have no power in the south. The werewoods there were all cut down thousands of years ago. How can they watch your brother when they have no eyes? Bran had not thought of that. It frightened him. If even the gods could not help his brother, what hope was there? Maybe Asha wasn't hearing them right. He cocked his head and tried to listen again. He thought he could hear the sadness now, but nothing more than that. The rustling grew louder. Bran heard muffled footfalls and a low humming, and Hoder came blundering out of the trees, naked and smiling. "Hoder!" "He must have heard our voices," Bran said. "Hoder, you forgot your clothes." "Hoder," Hoder agreed. He was dripping wet from the neck down, steaming in the chill air. His body was covered with brown hair, thick as a pelt. Between his legs, his manhood swung long and heavy. Asha eyed him with a sour smile. "Now there's a big man," she said. "He has giant's blood in him, or I'm the queen." "Master Luin says there are no more giants. He says they're all dead, like the children of the forest. All that's left of them are old bones in the earth that men turn up with plows from time to time." "Let Master Luin ride beyond the wall," Asha said. "He'll find giants then, or they'll find him. My brother killed one. 10 foot tall she was, and stunted at that. They've been known to grow big as 12 and 13 feet. Fierce things they are too, all hair and teeth, and the wives have beards like their husbands, so there's no telling them apart. The women take human men for lovers, and it's from them the half-bloods come. It goes harder on the women they catch. The man is so big they rip a maid apart before they get her with child." She grinned at him. "But you don't know what I mean, do you, boy?" "Yes, I do," Bran insisted. He understood about mating. He had seen dogs in a yard and watched a stallion mount a mare, but talking about it made him uncomfortable. He looked at Hoder. "Go back and bring your clothes, Hoder," he said. "Go dress." "Hoder!" He walked back the way he had come, ducking under a low-hanging tree limb. He was awfully big, Bran thought as he watched him go. "Are there truly giants beyond the wall?" he asked Asha, uncertainly. "Giants and worse than giants, lordling. I tried to tell your brother when he asked his questions, him and your master and that smiley boy Greyjoy. The cold winds are rising, and men go out from their fires and never come back. Or if they do, they are not men no more, but only wights, with blue eyes and cold black hands. Why do you think I run south with Stiv and Hallie and the rest of them fools? Man thinks he'll fight, the brave, sweet, stubborn man, like the White Walkers were no more than rangers. But what does he know? He can call himself king beyond the wall all he likes, but he's still just another old black crow who flew down from the Shadow Tower. He's never tasted winter. I was born up there, child, like my mother and her mother before her, and her mother before her, born of the free folk. We remember." Asha stood, her chains rattling together. "I tried to tell your lordling brother, only yesterday when I saw him in the yard. 'My Lord Stark,' I called to him, respectful as you please. But he looked through me, and that sweet Yove Greatjon Umber shoves me out of the path. So be it. I'll wear my irons and hold my tongue. A man who won't listen can't hear." "Tell me. Robb will listen to me. I know he will." "Will he now? We'll see. You tell him this, my lord. You tell him he's bound on marching the wrong way. It's north he should be taking his swords. North, not south. You hear me?" Bran nodded. "I'll tell him." But that night, when they feasted in the great hall, Robb was not with them. He took his meal in the Sala instead, with Lord Rickard and the Greatjon and the other lords' bannermen, to make the final plans for the long march to come. It was left to Bran to fill his place at the head of the table, and act the host to Lord Castak's sons and honoured friends. They were already at their places when Hoder carried Bran into the hall on his back, and knelt beside the high seat. 2 of the serving men helped lift him from his basket. Bran could feel the eyes of every stranger in the hall. It had grown quiet. "My lords," Hallie Smolin announced, "Brandon Stark of Winterfell." "I welcome you to our fires," Bran said stiffly. and offer you meat and mead in honor of our friendship." Harry and Carstark, the oldest of Lord Rickard's sons, bowed, and his brothers after him. Yet as they settled back in their places, he heard the younger two talking in low voices over the clatter of wine cups. "Sooner die than live like that," muttered one. His father's namesake added, and his brother Torrance said lightly the boy was broken inside as well as out, too craven to take his own life. Broken, Bran thought bitterly as he clutched his knife. Is that what he was now? Bran the Broken? "I don't want to be broken," he whispered fiercely to Master Luwin, who had been seated to his right. "I want to be a knight." "There are some who call my order the Knights of the Mind," Luwin replied. "You are a surpassing clever boy when you work at it, Bran. Have you ever thought that you might wear a master's chain? There is no limit to what you might learn." "I want to learn magic," Bran told him. "The crow promised that I would fly." Master Luwin sighed. "I can teach you history, healing, herb lore. I can teach you the speech of ravens and how to build a castle, and the way a sailor steers his ship by the stars. I can teach you to measure the days and mark the seasons, and at the citadel in Old Town they can teach you 1,000 things more. But Bran, no man can teach you magic." "The children could," Bran said. "The children of the forest." That reminded him of the promise he had made to Osha in the Godswood, so he told Luwin what she had said. The master listened politely. "The wildling woman could give old Nan lessons in telling tales, I think," he said when Bran was done. "I will talk with her again if you like, but it would be best if you did not trouble your brother with his folly. He is more than enough to concern him without fretting over giants and dead men in the woods. It's the Lannisters who hold your lord father, Bran, not the children of the forest." He put a gentle hand on Bran's arm. "Think on what I said, child." And 2 days later, as a red dawn broke across a windswept sky, Bran found himself in a yard beneath the gatehouse, strapped atop Dancer as he said his farewells to his brother. "You are the lord in Winterfell now," Robb told him. He was mounted on a shaggy grey stallion, his shield hung from the horse's side. Wood banded with iron, white and grey, and on it the snarling face of a dire wolf. His brother wore grey chainmail over bleached leathers, sword and dagger at his waist, a fur-trimmed cloak across his shoulders. "You must take my place, as I took father's, until we come home." "I know," Bran replied miserably. He had never felt so little or alone or scared. He did not know how to be a lord. "Listen to Master Luwin's counsel, and take care of Rickon. Tell him that I'll be back as soon as the fighting is done." Rickon had refused to come down. He was up in his chamber, red-eyed and defiant. "No!" he'd screamed when Bran had asked if he didn't want to say farewell to Robb. "No farewell!" "I told him," Bran said. "He says no one ever comes back." "He can't be a baby forever. He's a Stark, and near 4. Robb sighed. "Well, Mother will be home soon, and I'll bring back Father, I promise." He wheeled his courser around and trotted away. Greywind followed, loping beside the warhorse, lean and swift. Hallis Marlin went before them through the gate, carrying the rippling white banner of House Stark atop a high standard of grey ash. Theon Greyjoy and the Grey John fell in on either side of Robb, and their knights formed up in a double column behind them, steel-tipped lances glinting in the sun. Uncomfortably, he remembered Osha's words. "He's marching the wrong way," he thought. For an instant he wanted to gallop after him and shout a warning, but when Robb vanished beneath the portcullis, the moment was gone. Beyond the castle walls, a roar of sound went up. The foot soldiers and townsfolk were cheering Robb as he rode past, brand new. Cheering for Lord Stark, for the Lord of Winterfell on his great stallion, with his cloak streaming and grey wind racing beside him. They would never cheer for him that way, he realized with a dull ache. He might be the Lord in Winterfell while his brother and father were gone, but he was still Bran the Broken. He could not even get off his own horse, except to fall. When the distant cheers had faded to silence and the yard was empty at last, Winterfell seemed deserted and dead. Bran looked around at the faces of those who remained, women and children and old men. And Hoda. The huge stable boy had a lost and frightened look to his face. "Hodor," he said sadly. "Hodor," Bran agreed, wondering what it meant. Chapter 54. Daenerys. When he had taken his pleasure, Khal Drogo rose from their sleeping mats to tower above her. His skin shone dark as bronze in the ruddy light from the brazier, the faint lines of old scars visible on his broad chest. Ink-black hair, loose and unbound, cascaded over his shoulders and down his back, well past his waist. His manhood glistened wetly. The Khal's mouth twisted in a frown beneath the droop of his long mustachio. "The stallion who mounts the world has no need of iron chairs." Dany propped herself on an elbow to look up at him, so tall and magnificent. She loved his hair especially. It had never been cut. He had never known defeat. "It was prophesied that a stallion will ride to the ends of the earth," she said.
"The earth ends at the Black Salt Sea,"
Drogo answered at once. He wet a cloth in a basin of warm water to wipe the sweat and oil from his skin.
"No horse can cross the poison water."
"In the free cities there are ships by the thousand," Dany told him, as she had told him before. "Wooden horses with 100 legs that fly across the sea on wings full of wind." Khal Drogo did not want to hear it.
"We will speak no more of wooden horses and iron chairs."
He dropped the cloth and began to dress.
"This day I will go to the grass and hunt, woman-wife,"
he announced as he shrugged into a painted vest and buckled on a white belt with heavy medallions of silver, gold, and bronze. "Yes, my sun and stars," Dany said. Drogo would take his blood riders and ride in search of Hraca, the great white lion of the plains. If they returned triumphant, her lord husband's joy would be fierce, and he might be willing to hear her out. Savage beasts he did not fear, nor any man who had ever drawn breath, but the sea was a different matter. To the Dothraki, water that a horse could not drink was something foul. The heaving grey-green plains of the ocean filled them with superstitious loathing. Drogo was a bolder man than the other horse lords in 100 ways, she had found, but not in this. If only she could get him onto a ship. After the Khal and his blood riders had ridden off with their bows, Dany summoned her handmaids. Her body felt so fat and ungainly now that she welcomed the help of their strong arms and deft hands, whereas before she had often been uncomfortable with the way they fussed and fluttered about her. They scrubbed her clean and dressed her in sand silk, loose and flowing. As Doreah combed out her hair, she sent Jiki to find Ser Jorah Mormont. The night came at once. He wore horsehair leggings and painted vest, like a rider. Coarse black hair covered his thick chest and muscular arms.
"My princess, how may I serve you?"
"You must talk to my lord husband," Dany said. "Drogo says the stallion who mounts the world will have all the lands of the earth to rule, and no need to cross the poison water. He talks of leading his Khalasar east after Rhaego is born, to plunder the lands around the Jade Sea." The knight looked thoughtful.
"The Khal has never seen the 7 kingdoms," he said. "They are nothing to him. If he thinks of them at all, no doubt he thinks of islands, a few small cities clinging to rocks in the manner of Lorath or Lys, surrounded by the stormy seas. The riches of the east must seem a more tempting prospect."
"But he must ride west," Dany said, despairing. "Please, help me make him understand." She had never seen the 7 kingdoms either, no more than Drogo, yet she felt as though she knew them from all the tales her brother had told her. Viserys had promised her 1,000 times that he would take her back one day, but he was dead now, and his promises had died with him.
"The Dothraki do things in their own time, for their own reasons,"
the knight answered.
"Have patience, princess. Do not make your brother's mistake. We will go home, I promise you."
Home. The word made her feel sad. Ser Jorah had his bare island, but what was home to her? A few tales, names recited as solemnly as the words of a prayer, the fading memory of a red door. Was vast Dothrak to be her home forever? When she looked at the crowns of the Dosh Khaleen, was she looking at her future? Ser Jorah must have seen the sadness on her face.
"A great caravan arrived during the night, Khaleesi. 400 horses, from Pentos by way of Norvos and Kohor, under the command of merchant captain Bian Votiris. Illyria may have sent a letter. Would you care to visit the Western Market?"
Dany stared. "Yes," she said. "I would like that." The markets came alive when a caravan had come in. You could never tell what treasures the traders might bring this time, and it would be good to hear men speaking Valyrian again, as they did in the free cities. "Irri, have them prepare a litter."
"I shall tell your cause,"
Ser Jorah said, withdrawing. If Khal Drogo had been with her, Dany would have ridden her Silva. Among the Dothraki, mothers stayed on horseback almost up to the moment of birth, and she did not want to seem weak in her husband's eyes. But with the Khal off hunting, it was pleasant to lie back on soft cushions and be carried across vast Dothrak, with red silk curtains to shield her from the sun. Ser Jorah settled up and rode beside her, with the 4 young men of her caste and her handmaids. The day was warm and cloudless, the sky a deep blue. When the wind blew, she could smell the rich scents of grass and earth. As her litter passed beneath the stolen monuments, she went from sunlight to shadow and back again. Dany swayed along, studying the faces of dead heroes and forgotten kings. She wondered if the gods of burned cities could still answer prayers. "If I were not the blood of the dragon," she thought wistfully, "this could be my home." She was Khaleesi. She had a strong man and a swift horse, handmaids to serve her, warriors to keep her safe, an honored place in the Dosh Khaleen awaiting her when she grew old. And in her womb grew a son who would one day bestride the world. That should be enough for any woman, but not for the dragon. With Viserys gone, Daenerys was the last, the very last. She was the seed of kings and conquerors, and so too the child inside her. She must not forget. The Western Market was a great square of beaten earth surrounded by warrens of mud-baked brick, animal pens, whitewashed drinking halls. Hummocks rose from the ground like the backs of great subterranean beasts breaking the surface, yawning black mouths leading down to cool and cavernous storerooms below. The interior of the square was a maze of stalls and crookback ales, shaded by awnings of woven grass. 100 merchants and traders were unloading their goods and setting up in stalls when they arrived, yet even so the great market seemed hushed and deserted compared to the teeming bazaars that Dany remembered from Pentos and the other free cities. The caravans made their way to vast Dothrak from east and west not so much to sell to the Dothraki as to trade with each other, Ser Jorah had explained. The riders let them come and go unmolested, so long as they observed the peace of the sacred city, did not profane the mother of mountains or the womb of the world, and honored the crones of the Dosh Khaleen with the traditional gifts of salt, silver, and seed. The Dothraki did not truly comprehend this business of buying and selling. Dany liked the strangeness of the Eastern Market too, with all its queer sights and sounds and smells. She often spent her mornings there, nibbling tree eggs, locust pie, and green noodles, listening to the high, ululating voices of the spell singers, gaping at manticores in silver cages and immense grey elephants and the striped black and white horses of the Jogos Nai. She enjoyed watching all the people too. Dark solemn Ashai and tall pale Quartine, the bright-eyed men of Yteen monkey-tail hats, warrior maids from Bayasabad, Shamiriana, and Kayanaya, with iron rings in their nipples and rubies in their cheeks, even the dour and frightening shadow men, who covered their arms and legs and chests with tattoos, and hid their faces behind masks. The Eastern Market was a place of wonder and magic for Dany. But the Western Market smelled of home. As Irri and Jiki helped her from her litter, she sniffed and recognized the sharp odors of garlic and pepper, scents that reminded Dany of days long gone in the alleys of Tyrosh and Myr, and brought a fond smile to her face. Under that she smelled the heady sweet perfumes of Liz. She saw slaves carrying bowls of intricate Myrish lace and fine woods in a dozen rich colors. Caravan guards wandered among the ales in copper helmets and knee-length tunics of quilted yellow cotton, empty scabbards swinging from their woven leather belts. Behind one stall an armorer displayed steel breastplates worked with gold and silver in ornate patterns, and helms hammered in the shapes of fanciful beasts. Next to him was a pretty young woman selling Lannisport goldwork, rings and brooches and torques and exquisitely wrought medallions suitable for belting.
A huge eunuch guarded her stall, mute and hairless, dressed in sweat-stained velvets and scowling at anyone who came close. Across the aisle, a fat cloth trader from Yee was haggling with a pantoshi over the price of some green dye, the monkey tail on his hat swaying back and forth as he shook his head. "When I was a little girl, I loved to play in the bazaar," Danny told Sir Jorah as they wandered down the shady aisle between the stalls. "It was so alive there. All the people shouting and laughing, so many wonderful things to look at, though we seldom had enough coin to buy anything. Well, except for a sausage now and again, or honey fingers. Do they have honey fingers in the 7 Kingdoms, the kind they bake in Tirash?"
"Cakes, are they? I could not say, Princess."
The knight bowed.
"If you would pardon me for a time, I will seek out the captain and see if he has letters for us."
"Very well. I'll help you find him."
"There is no need for you to trouble yourself."
Sir Jorah glanced away impatiently.
"Enjoy the market. I will rejoin you when my business is concluded."
Curious, Danny thought as she watched him stride off through the throngs. She didn't see why she should not go with him. Perhaps Sir Jorah meant to find a woman after he met with the merchant captain. Horse frequently travelled with the caravans, she knew, and some men were queerly shy about their couplings. She gave a shrug. "Come," she told the others. Her handmaids trailed along as Danny resumed her stroll through the market. "Oh, look!" she exclaimed to Doria. "Those are the kind of sausages I meant." She pointed to a stall where a wizened little woman was grilling meat and onions on a hot fire stone. "They make them with lots of garlic and hot peppers." Delighted with her discovery, Danny insisted the others join her for a sausage. Her handmaids wolfed theirs down giggling and grinning, though the men of her caste sniffed at the grilled meat suspiciously. "They taste different than I remember," Danny said after her first few bites.
"In Pentos I make them with pork," the old woman said. "But all my pigs died under the Dothraki Sea. These are made of horse meat, Khaleesi, but I spice them the same."
"Oh." Danny felt disappointed, but Quaro liked his sausage so well he decided to have another one, and Rakharo had to outdo him and eat 3 more, belching loudly. Danny giggled. "You have not left since your brother the Khal Ragad was crowned by Drogo," said Irri. "It is good to see, Khaleesi." Danny smiled shyly. It was sweet to love. She felt half a girl again. They wandered for half the morning. She saw a beautiful feathered cloak from the Summer Isles and took it for a gift. In return, she gave the merchant a silver medallion from her belt. That was how it was done among the Dothraki. A bird seller taught the green and red parrot to say her name, and Danny laughed again, yet still refused to take him. What would she do with a green and red parrot in a khalasar? She did take a dozen flasks of scented oils, the perfumes of her childhood. She had only to close her eyes and sniff them, and she could see the big house with the red door once more. When Doria looked longingly at the fertility charm at the magician's booth, Danny took that too and gave it to the handmaid, thinking that now she should find something for Irri and Jiki as well. Turning a corner, they came upon a wine merchant offering thimble-sized cups of his wares to the passers-by.
"Sweet reds!"
he cried in fluent Dothraki.
"I have sweet reds from Liz and Volantis and Diabo, whites from Liz, Tyroshi pear brandy, firewine, pepper wine, the pale green nectars of Myr, smokeberry browns and Andalish sours. I have them, I have them." He was a small man, slender and handsome, his flaxen hair curled and perfumed after the fashion of Liz. When Danny paused before his stall, he bowed low. "A taste for the Khaleesi? I have a sweet red from Dorne, my lady. It sings of plums and cherries and rich dark oak. A cask, a cup, a swallow? One taste, and you will name your child after me."
Danny smiled. "My son has his name, but I will try your summer wine," she said in Valyrian as they spoke it in the free cities. The words felt strange on her tongue after so long. "Just a taste, if you would be so kind." The merchant must have taken her for Dothraki, with her clothes and her old hair and sun-browned skin. When she spoke, he gaped at her in
Can it be so?
My speech may be Tyroshi and my garb Dothraki, but I am of Westeros, of the Sunset Kingdoms, Dany told him. Doreah stepped up beside her. You have the honor to address Daenerys of the House Targaryen, Daenerys Stormborn, Khaleesi of the Riding Men and Princess of the Seven Kingdoms. The wine merchant dropped to his knees. Princess, he said, bowing his head. Rise, Dany commanded him. I would still like to taste that summer wine you spoke of. The man bounded to his feet.
That? Dornish swill. It is not worthy of a princess. I have a dry rat from the arbor, crisp and delectable. Please, let me give you a cask.
Khal Drogo's visits to the Free Cities had given him a taste for good wine, and Dany knew that such a noble vintage would please him. You honor me, sir, she murmured sweetly.
The honor is mine.
The merchant rummaged about in the back of his stall and produced a small oaken cask. Burned into the wood was a cluster of grapes.
The red wine sigil, he said, pointing. For the arbor, there is no finer drink.
Khal Drogo and I will share it together. Aggo, take this back to my litter, if you'd be so kind. The wine seller beamed as the Dothraki hefted the cask. She did not realize that Ser Jorah had returned until she heard the knight say, No. His voice was strange, brusque.
Aggo, put down that cask.
Aggo looked at Dany. She gave a hesitant nod. Ser Jorah, is something wrong?
I have a thirst. Open it, wine seller.
The merchant frowned.
The wine is for the Khaleesi, not for the likes of you, sir.
Ser Jorah moved closer to the stall.
If you don't open it, I'll crack it open with your head.
He carried no weapons here in the sacred city, save his hands. Yet his hands were enough, big, hard, dangerous, his knuckles covered with coarse dark hairs. The wine seller hesitated a moment, then took up his hammer and knocked a plug from the cask.
Pour,
Ser Jorah commanded. The 4 young warriors of Dany's caste arrayed themselves behind him, frowning, watching with their dark, almond-shaped eyes.
It would be a crime to drink this rich wine without letting it breathe.
The wine seller had not put his hammer down. Drogo reached for the whip coiled at his belt, but Dany stopped him with a light touch on the arm. Do as Ser Jorah says, she said. People were stopping to watch. The man gave her a quick, sullen glance.
As the princess commands.
He had to set aside his hammer to lift the cask. He filled 2 thimble-sized tasting cups, pouring so deftly he did not spill a drop. Ser Jorah lifted a cup and sniffed at the wine, frowning.
Sweet, isn't it?
The wine seller said, smiling.
Can you smell the fruit, sir? The perfume of the arbor? Taste it, my lord, and tell me it isn't the finest, richest wine that ever touched your tongue.
Ser Jorah offered him the cup.
You taste it first.
Me? The man laughed.
I'm not worthy of this vintage, my lord, and it's a poor wine merchant who drinks up his own wares.
His smile was amiable, yet she could see the sheen of sweat on his brow. You will drink, Dany said, cold as ice. Empty the cup, or I will tell them to hold you down while Ser Jorah pours the whole cask down your throat. The wine seller shrugged, reached for the cup, and grabbed the cask instead, flinging at her with both hands. Ser Jorah bowled into her, knocking her out of the way. The cask bounced off his shoulder and smashed open on the ground. Dany stumbled and lost her feet. No, she screamed, thrusting her hands out to break her fall, and Doreah caught her by the arm and wrenched her backward, so she landed on her legs and not her belly. The trader vaulted over the stall, darting between Aggo and Rakharo. Quaro reached for an arak that was not there as the blond man slammed him aside. He raced down the aisle. Dany heard the snap of Drogo's whip, saw the leather lick out and coil around the wine seller's leg. The man sprawled face first in the dirt. A dozen caravan guards had come running. With them was the master himself, Merchant Captain Bayan Votiris, a diminutive Norvoshi with skin like old leather and a bristling blue mustachio that swept up to his ears. He seemed to know what had happened without a word being spoken.
Take this one away to await the pleasure of the Khal,
he commanded, gesturing at the man on the ground. 2 guards hauled the wine cellar to his feet. "His goods I give to you as well, princess," the merchant captain went on. "Small token of regret that one of mine would do this thing." Dorea and Cheeky helped Dany back to her feet. The poisoned wine was leaking from the broken cask into the dirt. "How did you know?" she asked Ser Jorah, trembling. "How?" "I did not know, Khaleesi, not until the man refused to drink. But once I read Magister Illyrio's letter, I feared." His dark eyes swept over the faces of the strangers in the market. "Come, best not to talk of it here." Dany was near tears as they carried her back. The taste in her mouth was one she had known before: fear. For years she had lived in terror of Viserys, afraid of waking the dragon. This was even worse. It was not just for herself that she feared now, but for her baby. He must have sensed her fright, for he moved restlessly inside her. Dany stroked the swell of her belly gently, wishing she could reach him, touch him, soothe him. "You are the blood of the dragon, little one," she whispered as her litter swayed along, curtains drawn tight. "You are the blood of the dragon, and the dragon does not fear." Under the hollow hummock of earth that was her home in Vaz Dothrak, Dany ordered them to leave her, all but Ser Jorah. "Tell me," she commanded as she lowered herself into her cushions. "Was it the usurper?" "Yes." The knight drew out a folded parchment. "A letter to Viserys from Magister Illyrio. Robert Baratheon offers lands and lordship for your death, or your brother's." "My brother?" Her sob was half a laugh. "He does not know yet, does he? The usurper owes Drogo a lordship." This time her laugh was half a sob. She hugged herself protectively. "And me, you said. Only me." "You and the child," Ser Jorah said, grim. "No, he cannot have my son." She would not weep, she decided. She would not shiver with fear. The usurper has woken the dragon now, she told herself, and her eyes went to the dragon's eggs resting in their nest of dark velvet. The shifting lamplight limed their stony scales, and shimmering motes of jade and scarlet and gold swam in the air around them, like courtiers around a king. Was it madness that seized her then, born of fear? Or some strange wisdom buried in her blood? Dany could not have said. She heard her own voice saying, "Ser Jorah, light the brazier." "Khaleesi?" The knight looked at her strangely. "It is so hot. Are you certain?" She had never been so certain. "Yes, I have a chill. Light the brazier." He bowed. "As you command." When the coals were afire, Dany sent Ser Jorah from her. She had to be alone to do what she must do. This is madness, she told herself, as she lifted the black and scarlet egg from the velvet. It will only crack and burn, and it's so beautiful. Ser Jorah will call me a fool if I ruin it, and yet... Cradling the egg with both hands, she carried it to the fire and pushed it down amongst the burning coals. The black scales seemed to glow as they drank the heat. Flames licked against the stone with small red tongues. Dany placed the other 2 eggs beside the black one in the fire. As she stepped back from the brazier, the breath trembled in her throat. She watched until the coals had turned to ashes. Drifting sparks floated up and out of the smoke hole. Heat shimmered in waves around the dragon's eggs. And that was all. "Your brother Rhaegar was the last dragon," Ser Jorah had said. Dany gazed at her eggs sadly. What had she expected? 1,000 years ago they had been alive, but now they were only pretty rocks. They could not make a dragon. A dragon was air and fire, living flesh, not dead stone. The brazier was cold again by the time Khal Drogo returned. Kahollo was leading a pack horse behind him, with the carcass of a great white lion slung across its back. Above, the stars were coming out. The Khal laughed as he swung down off his stallion and showed her the scars on his legs where the Hrakkar had raked him through his leggings. "I shall make you cloak of its skin, moon of my life," he swore. When Dany told him what had happened at the market, all laughter stopped and Khal Drogo grew very quiet. "The poisoner was the first," Ser Jorah Mormont warned him.
but he will not be the last. Man will risk much for a lordship."
Drogo was silent for a time. Finally he said,
"This seller of poisons ran from the moon of my life. Better he should run after her. So he will. Drogo, Jorah Diandel, to each of you I say, choose any horse you wish from my herds, and it is yours. Any horse save my red and the silver that was my bright gift to the moon of my life. I make this gift to you for what you did. And to Rhaego, son of Drogo, the stallion who will mount the world, to him I also pledge a gift. To him I will give this iron chair his mother's father sat in. I will give him 7 kingdoms. I, Drogo, Khal, will do this thing."
His voice rose and he lifted his fist to the sky.
"I will take my Khalasar west to where the world ends, and ride the wooden horses across the black salt water as no Khal has done before. I will kill the men in the iron suits and tear down their stone houses. I will rape their women, take their children as slaves, and bring their broken gods back to Vaz Jothrak to bow down beneath the Mother of Mountains. This I vow, I, Drogo, son of Barbo. This I swear before the Mother of Mountains, as the stars look down in witness."
His Khalasar left Vaz Jothrak 2 days later, striking south and west across the plains. Khal Drogo led him on his great red stallion, with Daenerys beside him on her silver. The wine seller hurried behind him, naked, on foot, chained at throat and wrists. His chains were fastened to the halter of Dany's silver. As she rode, he ran after her, barefoot and stumbling. No harm would come to him, so long as he kept up. Chapter 55. Catelyn. It was too far to make out the banners clearly, but even through the drifting fog she could see that they were white, with a dark smudge in their center that could only be the direwolf of Stark, grey upon its icy field. When she saw it with her own eyes, Catelyn reined up her horse and bowed her head in thanks. The gods were good. She was not too late.
"They await our coming, my lady,"
Sir Willis Manderly said,
"as my lord father swore they would." "Let us not keep them waiting any longer, sir."
Sir Brynden Tully put the spurs to his horse and trotted briskly toward the banners. Catelyn rode beside him. Sir Willis and his brother Sir Wendell followed, leading their levies, near 1,500 men, some 20-odd knights and as many squires, 200 mounted lances, swordsmen and free riders, and the rest foot, armed with spears, pikes, and tridents. Lord Wyman had remained behind to see to the defences of White Harbour. A man of near 60 years, he had grown too stout to sit a horse.
"If I had thought to see war again in my lifetime, I should have eaten a few less eels,"
he told Catelyn when he met her ship, slapping his massive belly with both hands. His fingers were fat as sausages.
"My boys will see you safe to your son, though, have no fear."
His boys were both older than Catelyn, and she might have wished that they did not take after their father quite so closely. Sir Willis was only a few eels short of not being able to mount his own horse. She pitied the poor animal. Sir Wendell, the younger boy, would have been the fattest man she'd ever known had she only neglected to meet his father and brother. Willis was quiet and formal, Wendell loud and boisterous. Both had ostentatious walrus moustaches and heads as bare as a baby's bottom. Neither seemed to own a single garment that was not spotted with food stains. Yet she liked them well enough. They had gotten her to rob, as their father had vowed, and nothing else mattered. She was pleased to see that her son had sent eyes out, even to the east. The Lannisters would come from the south when they came, but it was good that Robb was being careful. My son is leading a host to war, she thought, still only half believing it. She was desperately afraid for him, and for Winterfell, yet she could not deny feeling a certain pride as well. A year ago he had been a boy. What was he now, she wondered. Outriders spied the Manderly banners, the white mermen with trident in hand, rising from a blue-green sea, and hailed them warmly. They were led to a spot of high ground dry enough for a camp. Sir Willis called a halt there, and remained behind with his men to see the fires laid and the horses tended, while his brother Wendell rode on with Catelyn and her uncle to present their father's respect to their liege lord. The ground under their horses' hoofs was soft and wet.
It fell away slowly beneath them as they rode past smoky peat fires, lines of horses, and wagons heavy laden with hard bread and salt beef. On a stony outcrop of land higher than the surrounding country, they passed the Lord's pavilion with walls of heavy sailcloth. Caitlin recognized the banner, the bull mows of the Hornwoods, brown on its dark orange field. Just beyond, through the mists, she glimpsed the walls and towers of Moat Cailin, or what remained of them. Immense blocks of black basalt, each as large as a crofter's cottage, lay scattered and tumbled like a child's wooden blocks, half sunk in the soft boggy soil. Nothing else remained of a curtain wall that had once stood as high as Winterfell's. The wooden keep was gone entirely, rotted away 1,000 years past, with not so much as a timber to mark where it had stood. All that was left of the great stronghold of the first men were 3 towers. 3 where there had once been 20, if the tale-tellers could be believed. The gatehouse tower looked sound enough, and even boasted a few feet of standing wall to either side of it. The drunkard's tower, off in the bog where the south and west walls had once met, leaned like a man about to spew a bellyful of wine into the gutter. And the tall, slender children's tower, where legend said the children of the forest had once called upon their nameless gods to send the hammer of the waters, had lost half its crown. It looked as if some great beast had taken a bite out of the crenellations along the tower top, and spit the rubble across the bog. All 3 towers were green with moss. A tree was growing out between the stones on the north side of the gatehouse tower, its gnarled limbs festooned with ropey white blankets of ghost skin. "God have mercy," Sir Brynden exclaimed when he saw what lay before them. "This is Moat Cailin? It's no more than a—"
"Death trap," Caitlin finished. "I know how it looks, Uncle. I thought the same the first time I saw it, but Ned assured me that this ruin is more formidable than it seems. The 3 surviving towers command the causeway from all sides, and any enemy must pass between them. The bogs here are impenetrable, full of quicksand and suckholes and teeming with snakes. To assault any of the towers, any army would need to wade through waist-deep black muck, cross a moat full of lizard lions, and scale walls slimy with moss, all the while exposing themselves to fire from archers in the other towers." She gave her uncle a grim smile. "And when night falls, there are said to be ghosts, cold, vengeful spirits of the north who hunger for Southron blood." Sir Brynden chuckled. "Remind me not to linger here. Last I looked, I was Southron myself." Standards had been raised atop all 3 towers. The cast-axe sunburst hung from the drunkard's tower, beneath the dire wolf. On the children's tower it was the Greyjohn's giant in shattered chains. But on the gatehouse tower, the stark banner flew alone. That was where Robb had made his seat. Caitlin made for it, with Sir Brynden and Sir Wendell behind her, their horses stepping slowly down the log and plank road that had been laid across the green and black fields of mud. She found her son surrounded by his father's lord's bannermen, in a draughty hall with the peat fire smoking in a black hearth. He was seated at a massive stone table, a pile of maps and papers in front of him, talking intently with Roose Bolton and the Greyjohn. At first he did not notice her, but his wolf did. The great grey beast was lying near the fire, but when Caitlin entered he lifted his head, and his golden eyes met hers. The lords fell silent one by one, and Robb looked up at the sudden quiet and saw her. "Mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Caitlin wanted to run to him, to kiss his sweet brow, to wrap him in her arms and hold him so tightly that he would never come to harm. But here in front of his lords she dared not. He was playing a man's part now, and she would not take that away from him. So she held herself at the far end of the basalt slab they were using for a table. The dire wolf got to his feet and padded across the room to where she stood. It seemed bigger than a wolf ought to be. "You've grown a beard," she said to Robb while Grey Wind sniffed her hand. He rubbed his stubble jaw, suddenly awkward. "Yes." His chin hairs were redder than the ones on his head. "I like it." Caitlin stroked the wolf's head, gently. "It makes you look like my brother Edmure." Grey Wind nipped at her fingers, playful, and trotted back to its place by the fire.
Sir Helmund Tallhard was the first to follow the dire wolf across the room to pay his respects, kneeling before her and pressing his brow to her hand. "Lady Caitlin," he said, "you are fair as ever, a welcome sight in troubled times." The Glovers followed, Galbot and Robert, and Great John Umber and the rest, one by one. Theon Greyjoy was the last. "I had not looked to see you here, my lady," he said as he knelt. "I had not thought to be here," Caitlin said, "until I came ashore at White Harbour, and Lord Wyman told me that Robb had called the banners. You know his son, Sir Wendell." Wendell Manderly stepped forward and bowed as low as his girth would allow. "And my uncle, Sir Brynden Tully, who has left my sister's service for mine." "The Blackfish," Robb said. "Thank you for joining us, sir. We need men of your courage. And you, Sir Wendell, I am glad to have you here. Is Sir Roderick with you as well, mother? I've missed him." "Sir Roderick is on his way north from White Harbour. I have named him Castellan and commanded him to hold Winterfell till our return. Master Luwin is a wise counsellor, but unskilled in the arts of war." "Have no fear on that count, Lady Stark," the Great John told her in his bass rumble. "Winterfell is safe. We'll shove our swords up Tywin Lannister's bunghole soon enough, begging your pardons, and then it's on the Red Keep to free Ned. My lady, a question, as it please you." Roose Bolton, Lord of the Dreadfort, had a small voice, yet when he spoke, larger men quieted to listen. His eyes were curiously pale, almost without colour, and his look disturbing. "It is said that you hold Lord Tywin's dwarf son as captive. Have you brought him to us? I vow we should make good use of such a hostage." "I did hold Tyrion Lannister, but no longer," Caitlin was forced to admit. A chorus of consternation greeted the news. "I was no more pleased than you, my lords. The gods saw fit to free him with some help from my fool of a sister." She ought not to be so open in her contempt, she knew, but her parting from the Eyrie had not been pleasant. She had offered to take Lord Robert with her, to foster him at Winterfell for a few years. The company of other boys would do him good, she had dared to suggest. Lysa's rage had been frightening to behold. "Sister or no," she had replied, "if you try to steal my son, you will leave by the moon door." After that there was no more to be said. The lords were anxious to question her further, but Caitlin raised a hand. "No doubt we will have time for all this later, but my journey has fatigued me. I would speak with my son alone. I know you will forgive me, my lords." She gave them no choice. Led by the ever-obliging Lord Hornwood, the bannermen bowed and took their leave. "And you, Theon," she added when Greyjoy lingered. He smiled and left them. There was ale and cheese on the table. Caitlin tilled a horn, sat, sipped, and studied her son. He seemed taller than when she'd left, and the wisp of beard did make him look older. Admer was 16 when he grew his first whiskers. "I will be 16 soon enough," Robb said. "And you are 15 now. 15 and leading a host to battle. Can you understand why I might fear Robb?" His look grew stubborn. "There was no one else." "No one?" she said. "Pray, who were those men I saw here a moment ago? Roose Bolton, Rickard Carstark, Galbot and Robert Glover, the Great John, Helmund Tallhard. You might have given the command to any of them. Gods be good, you might even have sent Theon, though he would not be my choice." "They are not Starks," he said. "They are men, Robb, seasoned in battle. You were fighting with wooden swords less than a year past." She saw anger in his eyes at that, but it was gone as quick as it came, and suddenly he was a boy again. "I know," he said, abashed. Are you sending me back to Winterfell?" Caitlin sighed. "I should. You ought never have left. Yet I dare not now. You have come too far. Some day these lords will look to you as their liege. If I pack you off now like a child being sent to bed without his supper, they will remember, and laugh about it in their cups. The day will come when you need them to respect you, even fear you a little. Laughter is poison to fear. I will not do that to you, much as I might wish to keep you safe." "You have my thanks, mother," he said, his relief obvious beneath the formality.
She reached across to his table and touched his hair. "You are my firstborn, Rob. I have only to look at you to remember the day you came into the world, red-faced and squalling." He rose, clearly uncomfortable with her touch, and walked to the hearth. Grey Wind rubbed his head against his leg. "You know about father?" "Yes." The reports of Robert's sudden death and Ned's fall had frightened Caitlin more than she could say, but she would not let her son see her fear. "Lord Manderley told me when I landed at White Harbour. Have you had any word of your sisters?"
"There was a letter," Rob said, scratching his dire wolf under the jaw. "One for you as well when it came to Winterfell with mine." He went to the table, rummaged among some maps and papers, and returned with a crumpled parchment. "This is the one she wrote me. I never thought to bring yours." Something in Rob's tone troubled her. She smoothed out the paper and read. Concern gave way to disbelief, then to anger, and lastly to fear. "This is Cersei's letter, not your sister's," she said when she was done. "The real message is in what Sansa does not say. All this about how kindly and gently the Lannisters are treating her. I know the sound of a threat, even whispered. They have Sansa hostage, and they mean to keep her." "There is no mention of Arya,"
Rob pointed out, miserable.
"No." Caitlin did not want to think what that might mean, not now, not here. "I had hoped, if you still held the imp, a trade of hostages." He took Sansa's letter and crumpled it in his fist, and she could tell from the way he did it that it was not the first time. "Is there word from Deary? I wrote to Aunt Lisa asking help. Has she called Lord Arryn's banners, do you know? Will the Knights of the Whale come join us?"
"Only one," she said. "The best of them, my uncle. But Brynden Blackfish was a Tully first. My sister is not about to stir beyond her bloody gate."
Rob took it hard. "Mother, what are we going to do? I brought this whole army together, 18,000 men, but I'm not certain." He looked to her, his eyes shining. The proud young lord melted away in an instant, and quick as that he was a child again, a 15-year-old boy looking to his mother for answers. It would not do. "What are you so afraid of, Rob?" she asked gently. He turned his head away to hide the first tear. "If we march, even if we win, the Lannisters hold Sansa and father. They'll kill them, won't they?"
"They want us to think so."
"You mean they're lying?"
"I do not know, Rob. What I do know is that you have no choice. If you go to King's Landing and swear fealty, you will never be allowed to leave. If you turn your tail and retreat to Winterfell, your lords will lose all respect for you. Some may even go over to the Lannisters. Then the Queen, with that much less to fear, can do as she likes with her prisoners. Our best hope, our only true hope, is that you can defeat the foe in the field. If you should chance to take Lord Tywin or the Kingslayer captive, well then a trade might very well be possible, but that is not the heart of it. So long as you have power enough that they must fear you, Ned and your sister should be safe. Cersei is wise enough to know that she may need them to make her peace, should the fighting go against her."
"What if the fighting doesn't go against her?" Rob asked. "What if it goes against us?"
Caitlin took his hand. "Rob, I will not soften the truth for you. If you lose, there is no hope for any of us. They say there is naught but stone at the heart of Casterly Rock. Remember the fate of Rhaegar's children.